So, good morning. Welcome to today's Smart Syndicator Mastermind call. I have a very special guest with me today, Bryan Kerns. He's the president of the Tipton Group. They manage over 1,600 units, I believe, across Texas and Oklahoma. And Brian's gonna take you on a journey today through the process of how they turned a property around for us. So we're struggling with extremely high delinquency. It was peaked at like $84,000 in a month of ending the month with delinquency, all the way down to, I believe, one month we had it at zero, and then it's been kind of bouncing around the bottom, low four digits. So it really made a huge impact on the property that smoothed out the operations, got rid of bad tenants, got good paying tenants in. And so he's going to provide some insights into how that process unfolded. With that, welcome, Bryan.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, just a kind of a brief summary for us. As Brandon mentions, we're here in Dallas. That's where our home office is, our corporate office. We manage about 16,000 units across the state. Mostly Dallas is our biggest presence, but we also manage in Houston, Austin, and have been in East Texas, San Antonio. We're third-party fee managers, and I always try to tell clients that there's an advantage to that. I'm not out raising money. We're not out trying to develop properties or buy land. So our focus is 100% on our performance relative to the management of the properties. And one of the key things that's helped to make us successful is that, unlike sometimes the big guys can be, we take a very entrepreneurial approach to the management of the property. We roll up our sleeves and figure out what each property needs. And then we implement whatever strategy we feel like is going to be successful. We don't take the same playbook and try to make it fit on every property, which is what is a little more typical when you get to kind of some of the bigger, more national companies. Most of our clients are probably just like you folks, very entrepreneurial, looking for opportunities, absolutely intent on cash flow and being able to generate a return on their money and their partner's money. The property that Brandon's mentioning specifically, when we went out and first took a look at it and started kind of rolling up our sleeves, we were actually pretty excited because it was obvious that the management company that was there at the time, for whatever reason, was not doing the job that they should. As we're trying to get our hands wrapped around a property, we will typically get out, interview the staff, spend time with them, because quite honestly, a lot of the times the things that you need to know are not the things that somebody will tell you when you're sitting across from the desk and you've just met them for the first day. They're the things that come out of their mouth on day 3 or 4 when you're out walking units and you're looking at the pool equipment or whatever. So we spend time with the staff trying to really assess both their abilities and what challenges the property has. We shop all the competition to make sure that we can create a benchmark for what we think is reasonable relative to occupancy and rents. We walk all the units, and typically that would include occupied units too, so that we know physically what kind of condition the property is in, not just the vacant units, but what are the quality of the residents in those units. We have always done a physical inspection of every single one of our properties in the fall as a part of our budget process. And we're trying to kind of identify, once again, condition of units, but I'm also trying to identify, sometimes we rent to people that on paper look great. They've got a good job, they've got good credit, but they're horrible residents. They have messy apartments, they have too many pets, yada, yada, yada. And we will frequently kind of police those elements as a byproduct of getting into those units and doing a preventive maintenance inspection all during the fall. One of the advantages we had with the property that Brandon's talking about is I think that the management company had some real challenges with staffing, both their own staffing in their office and the staffing for the folks on site. I don't believe we have any people at the property that were there when we took over. We made through that transition. We went out and found a new manager. We found new maintenance staff, because that's the backbone of the property. You've got to have the right people, and then they've got to have the right direction and support. One of the things I think we've always been very good at is we've been able to maintain lower turnover in our employees than what is typical in our business. I've got 14 regional supervisors, And those 14 supervisors collectively have about 12, 15 years worth of experience with me. And so once we find somebody that we know is above average, we go out of our way to make sure that, they're compensated fairly and even above what's kind of typical in the industry, to make sure that they have the right support, to make sure that they know that they're appreciated, that they're respected. And all those things kind of contribute to keeping those people long term. I'll give you just one perfect example. A few years ago, we created a 501c3 named Tipton Cares. And I seeded the 501c3 with $300,000 the first year that we operated it. Since then, our nest egg has grown to almost $1 million, but we've used that money to provide support to employees and employees' families in a time of need. Car crash, earner is home recuperating for 2 months. Had that happen with a maintenance guy in Houston. Wife is a stay-at-home mom with two little kids, and we made sure they had enough money to pay the rent, keep the lights on, and buy groceries. And when our people kind of hear those kind of things about what we're doing to be supportive of them, it helps to generate more loyalty with us, which means they're not as anxious to run down the street if somebody offers them another dollar an hour. So the people have been really the key to our success, both in the corporate office and on site. We were very successful at this property that Brandon mentioned specifically at getting some very good staff in there that were really key to turning the property around and really focusing on the things they needed to relative to quality of the folks who were there, paying rent, and then making sure that the maintenance was being done properly and was being done in a timely manner so that the residents, were satisfied.
And Brian, just to add to the like you tried to retain our on-site, like you tried to retrain them. I saw that you. It's not like you just showed up and cleaned house, right? You tried to help them, and then they were just not receptive to the training.
Right, right. And what typically happens with us is, there's a learning curve on every single property where we're trying to get up to speed as fast as possible about what all the details are, what all the aspects are of the property and the maintenance and the mechanical systems. And even when we don't think that the folks there are going to be long term, we know that there's a window of at least a few weeks where we want to try to get as much information as we can before we make that change. Sometimes we're surprised by people who don't seem to be performing, but given the right motivation and the right support, then kind of turn things around. I'll give you a perfect example. We took over a property in Houston. This has probably been 25 years ago. And the client that we were going to manage the property for was very unhappy when he heard that we were going to retain the manager because he thought the manager was the problem. What we discovered was the company that owned the property owned entirely their entire real estate portfolio was retail, and it was the only multifamily property they owned. On top of that, the asset manager was out of California, and the manager in Houston never saw him or her and did not have any support. And we kind of convinced the client that, hey, we think this manager has some real potential. And 2 years later, she was our Manager of the Year recipient for our Houston property. So, just a perfect example of sometimes the people that aren't performing are not performing because they have not been given the right direction and support. But yeah, to Brandon's point, we try to get in there and analyze those people and do a thorough job of it before we make that final decision.
No, I'm sure they appreciate that for what it was worth. Yeah. Um, and it did come at a cost. Like you have to pay, as an owner, you have to be willing to pay for quality. You got to factor that into your underwriting when you're acquiring a property. Like overestimate how much you're going to pay, and then be pleasantly surprised if the market bears differently. But
You
be
know,
willing to pay for quality.
one of the things too, I mentioned this. We kicked off last year a formal advancement program. So it's a program that has some very detailed steps. If you are an assistant manager and you want to be a manager, if you're an assistant maintenance and you want to be the lead maintenance, it's a very detailed program that spells out what steps are necessary if you want to move ahead. We've always done a very good job of of kind of building our own talent, creating our own talent, and helping them to be in a position to take over more and more responsibility. One of the reasons we did the formal advancement program is I wanted to be able to show it to people when they were considering coming to work for us. There's not too many companies that have that. There's not too many companies that really advertise it. And in today's tight labor market, kind of to your point, Brandon, it's not just the salary that people are looking for. They're looking for stability. They're looking for a lot of times opportunity, and they want to know that if they come in and perform at a level, that you will do what you can to kind of move them along. And I'm convinced that now that we've formalized what we have always done more informally, that that will help us not only to retain the good people we have and identify those people who are ambitious, but also help to sell our company to those people who are considering coming to work for us, but honestly also are talking to, other companies too.
Yeah, and we actually got a question about the fund that you had created for your employees. How did you seed that? Like, how did you grow that to $1 million? Was it just savings account, or like, did you invest that?
You know what? We originally seeded the initial amount. We have done fundraisers probably 5 or 6 times a year over the last few years. I've actually solicited some contributions from our clients, most of which are smart enough to understand that anything we're doing to really be supportive of our employees, it generates a return for them. But yeah, we've just been very aggressive about fundraising. One of the things that I hope to do, and we invested the money, but we invested it very conservatively. With interest rates where they are now, a big chunk of that money has been in CDs generating 4 or 5%. Last thing in the world I want to do is look at a financial statement that says that, I've invested in stocks and now the fund is down by 20 to 30%.
Crypto, yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
not that
crypto
that
you'd be okay, I guess. But
yeah, not that at
anyways,
some point that might not make sense. We kind of started with nothing and are being very conservative about it
right.
up to this point.
No, that's awesome. You're actually the first management company to even mention something like that.
You know what? I'm not aware of too many people that have done it. And I served on the apartment association board, so was in those board meetings with all the players from Lincoln and Trammell Crow and Graystar and all the big guys. And what we like to sell employees on is that we are big enough to provide support to them, but we're not too big for them to get lost. And if you're working for a company that manages 100,000, 200,000, 400,000 units, they're big enough to get lost. And my wife and I have worked together since I bought the company in 1997. My three oldest sons all are working for me and have been since they graduated from college. In fact, for the most part, they had to do a whole bunch of really nasty jobs while they were going to high school and college because I
Good.
thought it was important that they get exposure not to the office, not to the just the leasing side, but cleaning out the trash compactor area and picking up dog poops and spreading mulch. And so they understand what the staff on site do and have a very healthy respect for that. And the same is true too. Some of the people that they are now supervising are managers that they literally went to work for in the summertime and cleaned pools and picked up trash and stuff like that. So there's a level of mutual respect. But we've been very successful at operating the company as a family business. And that appeals to people too, because they know that that's a little different than if you were a publicly traded company and having to answer to investment bankers on Wall Street.
And I'll tell you that factored into our decision-making process when we were shopping management companies, because there's another really amazing company out there, and they've done amazing work for us on another property. However, it is about half the size of the subject property we're talking about today. And that was kind of like the bulk of their portfolio is these smaller, kind of like mid 80 to 100 unit type properties. And they were crushing it for us on that. And so they were actually your only competitor in that. And we wanted to see a management company that had a healthy portfolio of these large companies and experience turning them around. So that factored into the equation is the size and scope of your company. Not too big to where we call it nowadays internally busting a wainer. Like growing way too fast for your britches, you know, you're getting ahead of yourself. Um, but big enough to manage things, you know, properly and have appropriate staff if you need to pull a regional, pull maintenance from another properties that's operating similarly, that you would have that the bench is deep enough, if
Right,
that makes
right.
sense.
And I have a real perspective because quite honestly, when I bought the company, we were only managing 2,500 units. We had had a big client that had about 4,000 units that sold them, and all of them went away fairly quickly. And that was part of what motivated my old boss to consider selling me the company. It was kind of a down moment for Tipton, to be
Hmm.
perfectly honest. And so when I first bought the company, we only managed 2,500 units, and I know how difficult it is to manage, when you only have a couple of people in the office. And to your point, Brandon, you're exactly right. We've got 14 regionals. If somebody is out with COVID or on maternity leave, I've got plenty of other folks who can step up and fill the void. One of the things that we do that's not always consistent with our competitors either is that we've got several maintenance supervisors that are on our payroll. And those guys provide support to the maintenance staff, and then they also stick handle most of the major capital improvements. So I've got two guys in the Dallas area, one on the Tarrant County side, one on the Dallas County side. And those guys started out with a construction background before they got into multifamily. So if we're going to replace roofs on a property, I don't have to be concerned about whether the regional for that property has enough experience to deal with the roofing contractor. We get our maintenance and construction supervisor involved. They meet the vendors, they help to identify the scope of work, they review bids, they make their recommendation, and then once we sign a contract, they are supervising the work to make sure it gets done properly. And that's an area where in our business there's always been, it's not been uncommon that there be a little bit of a breakdown. Somebody hires a company to fill in a blank to replace a chiller, put on roofs, but the maintenance guy at the property and the manager have never done that work before, so they don't know whether the contractor is cutting corners or not. My guys are seasoned veterans, construction background, been in the business now, multifamily, for 20 years. And when they get out there, they make sure that the vendor is doing the work that they're supposed to and doing it the quality that they're supposed to. And that takes a load of responsibility off of both the manager and the regional, but they're also there to provide support. We're in the midst of, this week is our maintenance appreciation week. And my maintenance supervisors are going to end up having lunches, one in Dallas, one in Houston, two in Dallas, one in Houston, one in Austin. And we bring all the lead maintenance guys together and we basically celebrate them and we tell them thank you and make sure that they know they're appreciated. And I'm not aware of any company that does anything like that. But I tell you what it means for us is it means, once again, that those people that are working for us are not going to jump ship for 50 cents an hour more or $1 an hour more down the street, especially if they've worked in the business for a while and been a couple of different places before they came to work for us, because they know there are a lot of companies out there where they will just be a number and they will get lost in the shuffle. So we really do bend over backwards to try to make sure the employees know that they're appreciated and respected. For years, I've done a birthday card with a Chili's gift certificate and two movie tickets to every employee on their birthday. It costs us $45 a person. And for years, there was a lead maintenance guy on one of our properties in Carrollton that when we had our Christmas party, our awards banquet, he would come up to me and thank me for the Chili's gift card and the movie tickets and tell me that it was his date night with his wife every single year and they look forward to it like clockwork. And sometimes you do those little things and you think, oh, there was a real motivation for doing it, but there's been a few times along the way that I've thought, gosh, do we need to keep doing it? But then you get that feedback from the employees, and that's the way we've been able to attract and keep good employees. Employees are the backbone to this business. I've always told clients that at the end of the day, we cannot be successful if the folks on site are average or below average. Even if I've got a superstar regional, they're just not there often enough. It's the folks on site that make it happen. And when we get the right people on site and then they get the right direction, the right support from their regional and from the company itself, that's when they're successful. And all those factors all kind of came together on the property that Brandon was mentioning.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think, we've covered a lot of strategic things. These are very important, like for growing your company and building a stable foundation for employees. Let's shift gears just a little bit into more tactical stuff. Like I know some people on the call today, they want us like, how did we roll up our sleeves? What actionable steps can I take if I have a property that's struggling with these things, high delinquency, high vacancy, or economic vacancy? And so let's go back in time for a moment and take them on the journey with this particular property. I believe we engaged with you in March of 23.
That's correct.
We had we had accounts receivable was like 42,000 at the end of the month. So we had really high delinquency. And so we decided, we needed to rip the Band-Aid off, and you guys were totally in line with that. We weren't going to just try to, edge here and there, get rid of non slow paying or non-paying tenant here and there. It was like it was go time when we hired you, and so I want to say it was like a 1 to 2 month time frame of an onboarding to where you were getting acclimated with our financials, interviewing and observing our staff and that sort of thing. Can you walk us through where it went from there?
Yeah, one of the things that became very obvious, and I'm not sure for what reason, but there had been, I'm assuming, a lot of pressure on the on-site staff to kind of move the occupancy needle, and their reaction to that was to lower their standards. And it didn't take long to realize that a bunch of the people that they had rented to were not qualified in the first place, and those were the people that were not paying the rent. So yeah, to
Yeah.
your point, Brandon, it's a lot of times it's a bigger challenge because a lot of people don't want to rip the Band-Aid off. They want to kind of do it over a longer period of time and do it slower. But we got in and evaluated every single one of the files in the office to try to determine which people who had been rented to, who are on the delinquency report, were not qualified. If somebody has an issue with paying the rent and they're qualified, but it's because of some short-term issue, they missed a bonus check, they had a $400 repair on their car that was unexpected. Those are the kind of people that you try to work with to the extent that you can. But when we got in and looked at the files, it became obvious that a lot of those people should never have been leased to in the first place. It probably wouldn't have mattered how long we worked with them. They were always going to be problematic. So the first thing that we did is to make sure that we put in place reasonable leasing standards. When I say reasonable, that means that you evaluate where the property is, what the demographic is, the demographic of the average renter kind of walking into the office. Are we going to require 2.5 times the rent? Are we going to require 3 times the rent? I've seen properties that only have a 2 times the rent requirement, which that's getting pretty slim. But yeah, so we knew right out of the chute that evicting those folks who had not been paying was probably the best option, even though, that eviction process can take 45, 60 days. We've still got a couple of JPs in Dallas that act like they're in the middle of the pandemic, and if a resident comes in and tells any kind of a hard luck story at all, they'll kick the can down the road a month or two. And so we've still got some venues in Dallas where it might take us 4 months to evict somebody, which is crazy. I mean, it's always
Yeah.
been 30, 45 days in Texas for the most part. But we started that process. And then, of course, the flip side is they've got to have a plan to turn those units quickly. And you've got to have a leasing and marketing plan to generate traffic and be able to move good people in behind them. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that we do is the regionals get out and physically shop all of the comps. And I can generate a CoStar report and it'll tell me how many properties are in a 2 or 3 mile radius that are the same vintage and the same quality, but it certainly doesn't tell you how those properties are being managed. So we go out and physically shop those properties as prospects, look at their information online, and then try to determine what we have to do from a marketing standpoint. Which of those properties are our true comps, which are aspirational comps. There may be a comp or two that's better located, better amenities, better floor plans, and we know we're probably not going to beat them, especially if they're on their A game. But we certainly want to draft up behind them and be as close to them as we can. So, you identify those marketing elements, and the other thing that I think is really true for us and not always with other companies. I had a client that hired us to manage a property in Austin, Texas. about a year ago. And when I asked him why he was firing, it was a big name company. He said, you know what? Every time we asked the regional for something, we wanted a change on the financial statement. We wanted to pivot relative to marketing. Their answer was that they would put in a ticket, and the ticket would go to the accounting department, to the marketing department, to the HR department. And one of the advantages we have, kind of the size we are, is the regionals that work for me know that they are responsible. They're not getting permission from anybody else. And if they feel like they need to do something that's a little bit out of the box, then they talk with myself, my executive VP, Tammy, who Brandon knows really well, who's our regional VP. All three of us supervise and support those regionals, but we're also not afraid to do something out of the box and try something, and then admit if it doesn't work that we stop it and move on. I always give one of my horror stories as an example. When I was very young in this business back in the late '80s, I managed a property in Fort Worth for a gentleman out of Toronto, and we decided we were going to have this big carnival at the property, and literally had the merry-go-round and the bounce houses and ponies that walked people around. And the day of the carnival, it was raining, and I think we spent $10,000 and got zero leases. Unfortunately, I was the guy that had to pick up the phone and call the Toronto client and tell him that. So we probably don't commit as much money to any one big thing anymore because you just never know where something's going to work. But we come up with a marketing plan. We start to implement that marketing plan, and then the real key is to have some accountability for what's working, what's not working. We certainly have a lot of marketing efforts today involve AI, internet outreach marketing that's done kind of with text message and emails. But we will also roll up our sleeves and do it old school and create a whole bunch of gift baskets and take them to a bunch of the businesses around the property and communicate with people that way and try to get our name out there. A lot of times we will do a preferred employer program, and then we get some of the businesses to sign up for it. And in exchange for them giving our new move-ins and our residents some perks, we will provide them a discounted admin fee up front, a discounted deposit if they qualify. Usually not a big discount on the rent, but just some of the upfront costs. But once again, the key thing with that is that, after all my years in the business, I'm usually pretty confident what I think is going to work, but it doesn't always work exactly the way you think. So you've got to be kind of nimble. And I remember on the property Brandon's talking about specifically, we probably changed our marketing plan a dozen times in those first, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, to implement more things, to double down on things that we were doing that seemed to be successful. But I think that's the key. And once again, if you're small and you've got a lot of attention being paid to the property, not only by the regional supervisor but also by the people who support them, then that's where it makes it easy to kind of make those
Mhm.
decisions and to pivot when necessary. And yeah, to your point, Brandon, I certainly know there are a lot of companies out there today that manage 100,000 units that managed 20,000 units 4 years ago, and their goal has been in the last however many years just to get big for the sake of getting big, and how those guys can manage it effectively with all that turmoil going on. We've always been very lucky that we've had a stable group of clients that were generally tended to be more buy and hold medium to long term. And that's also helped to provide a little bit of continuity for our employees. It's provided a little bit less turmoil and turnover because we're not out there just actively trying to assess every single, by other management companies, every single account we can possibly get. I tell clients all the time, I've said no to as many properties in the last 10 years as I've said yes to. We had a we had a
Mhm.
potential client out of New York that called me last fall, and they own 14 properties along Gaston Avenue in Dallas. Those 14 properties all built in the 1960s, and they all ranged between 12 units, and at the high, I think one might have been 100 and something units, 500 units. But in talking to them and kind of assessing the type of owner that they were and what their expectations were, And then knowing exactly kind of what that submarket is like, because we manage in East Dallas a few properties, we decided that it just was not the right fit for us. And I kind of politely declined, which is not easy to do when you're in our business and you know, 500 units is 500
S-
units.
Send them to a competitor.
It was not a good
Yeah,
fit. And that's part of that's also been a part of our being able to be successful.
very cool. And so shifting gears, when I say ripping out the Band-Aid, it's not a fast-moving process,
Mhm.
as much as we'd like it to be. Uh, it's essentially like a 6 to 12 month ride you're in for, and there is going to be some capital expenditure in that process because you're going to be turning units. You are going to be dipping into reserves, and so you just need to be prepared for that. You know, it's not a quick fix. I want to say we move the needle like 2 to 3% per month to get to 90%, but to do it in the right way. Like before, Brian alluded to, you don't want to just fill up the property to get high occupancy because then your economic occupancy drops because you've got people not paying. I did like a forensic audit of the accounting for 1 month that I saw a rash of either people paid 1 month and stopped paying or paid nothing and then just paid nothing. When we did that little forensic analysis, I sent the list that I found to Tammy and she found like over half of them had fake pay stubs. So there's infrastructure, there's technology now that can use AI to detect fake pay stubs, but it's important to not let that happen in the first place, you know? So that was a huge part of the turning process is improving the filtration process of the funnel that you've created. So that was like, I guess, step two. We went from onboarding and analysis to implementation of these new systems, new people involved in the process. And so over the course of the 6 months, you know, we had a drop in occupancy, in physical occupancy, but our economic occupancy started to improve over time, all the way up to where we are. So just wanted to kind of lay out the framework, the timeline of how this works. And then just retention and making sure the systems stay in place and people stay motivated and incentivized to continue operating well.
And that's a big point too, Brandon. I might mention you kind of hit on it. You know, though you might have a element of residents at the property that don't belong, and they're the troublemakers. They're the ones that are not paying. They're the ones that you know are not respecting what the community policies are. You've got to really provide a very significant outreach to the good residents that are there because you do not want to lose those either. And sometimes they're frustrated by the people they see moving in next to them,
Right.
and so having that outreach, making sure they know there's a new sheriff in town, we're cleaning house, we're taking care of things, we're going to make sure that the common areas are maintained properly, that you're going to get your service when you need it, and it's going to be quick and it's going to be efficient, is another part of one of those pillars to try to get you to that point where, you know, now I've got the bad people out and I can rent to some more good people to supplement the good ones that we're here to start with.
Yeah, and COVID presented an opportunity for bad management to have excuses. What I saw is that when we had evictions in play, they would, I think that they just weren't managing the process correctly because they kept saying, "Oh, this person got abated, this person got abated." Like they kept kicking the can down the road. But as soon as you guys came in, like that almost stopped. The evictions were going through, and I was like, "What's the difference?" You know? It's just knowing how to navigate that process and showing up on time, making sure all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted, everybody's being served correctly. I think that wasn't happening before. And it's like you don't know, especially if you're newer syndicator, you don't really know what good management is. And so I've experienced both, you know. It's almost an educational process. They shouldn't be taking forever, especially in Texas.
No, no, not at all.
So for for people acquiring properties, wanting to engage with you, what does that process look like for that pre-due diligence? Like, do you have a staff member that will help build a financial profile for a property and put into their pro forma?
Yeah, yes, we do. So we do a couple of different things. A lot of my clients will do kind of their own underwriting. And
Mhm.
they've got their own program. They review financial statements. So we will review a client's underwriting and then give them our feedback about what we feel like. We have a fairly detailed expense history, not just for the 16,000 units we're managing today, but for the 50,000 units that we've managed over the years. So we kind of slice and dice expenses based on the size of property, based on the year of construction, the metro area, and we can a lot of times kind of dial down to what we think are reasonable expense levels, irregardless of what a financial statement has on it. I did a pro forma for a client a couple of weeks ago. And when I sent it to him, I told him, I says, look, don't look at this pro forma and compare it to the financial statement that you got from the seller, because the financial statement from the seller has got all kinds of problems. I don't think it's accurate. And I'm not sure why. It was very, very, very minimal amount of information, but kind of organized in a way that was hard to kind of decipher what actual individual expenses were for maintenance, repairs, admin. We pride ourselves on being able to operate more efficiently and at a lower expense level than most of our competitors. I'll give you kind of a perfect example. So when I'm budgeting for administrative expenses, we typically budget somewhere between 180 a door and up to 250 a door. Kind of depends on the size of the property. It depends on what systems the property is using, what services they're taking advantage of or have committed to. But part of the way that we keep that expense level down, I've certainly seen some properties that have had three, $400 a unit in G&A admin. Part of the way we keep that down is, number one, we don't pass through any expenses to the property. Our management fee is our fee, and we don't charge data processing. We don't charge administrative, which is a lot of those are typical with the big companies. We get paid our management fee, and then all of our expenses get paid out of that. We've had a relationship with Chase for 30 years, and JP Morgan Chase does not charge us any bank fees on any of our operating accounts, and that's not very common today. A typical size property, 300 units, can run $300 or $400 a month in bank fees. And because of our relationship with Chase, because of the book of business we've had with them, they do not charge us for those. So we have figured out a way to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing on the property level, but we're not wasting any money. From a payroll perspective, we're tweaking a pro forma on a 140 unit property, I believe, right now that's got 4 full-time employees. And I've physically seen the property. I toured with the client. There's absolutely no reason in the world that that property needs 4 full-time employees. So we will come up with a plan to staff it with less people, but still get the same job done. And this property is kind of typical of ones we see sometimes. They're ones I love to see. The guy's owned the property for 15 years. He's fat and happy, and so he's not really pushing the management company to be efficient.
Undermanaged. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I know there are ways that we can operate more efficiently than they are. But we take those financial statements, we kind of dig into them, we compare them to kind of our experience, our expenses on our existing properties. And then when we get out to do the due diligence, we kind of roll up our sleeves and make sure that the numbers that we kind of created up front are still kind of consistent, because sometimes properties have unique differences that make the expenses a little bit higher in this category or that category. And then of course you're always trying to identify those things where you can make a difference, whether it's a utility savings, or as I mentioned, operating the property with fewer people and being able to cut down on payroll. But typically we do that analysis kind of upfront. It can be difficult for me if somebody sends me a financial statement on a Monday and says offers are due on Wednesday. We'd really like you to do a pro forma, because there is a lot of analysis. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. And we typically review those, and our corporate office staff, Kelly, Tammy, I, Brandon, and Patrick, are part of the team that will collectively do that work. But we typically kind of share our thoughts and share what we're putting together. But yeah, we try to either review what a client's put together on their own, or help them to create that pro forma, and to be able to, be able to project, for instance, if we're going to add package lockers, what do we think we can charge the residents on a monthly basis? What's our fee going to be for putting in the package lockers? And what time frame will it take for us to fully 100% implement that across all units? We've probably put in package locker rooms and systems in the last 4 years at 30 properties plus. And with very few exceptions, I think that's kind of a no-brainer if you don't have them. It's nice if you can put them in a room like a laundry room or we converted an old maintenance storage at a property in Carrollton into a package locker room, but we've even done them outside. The mailboxes a lot of times on properties are outside, so you build a bit of a structure to kind of cover them, and you make sure that you use the equipment that is made for outdoor, fluctuations in temperature and weather. But we've got a tab on our pro forma where we plug in the cost of the package lockers, and how many of them we think we're going to roll over on every lease renewal and new lease. Same thing if we think we're going to implement pet yards. How often can you do them? How much are they going to cost? What kind of a premium do we think we can get? Most of the time on pet yards, if we're taking over a new property and we feel like there's a lot of potential for it, we'll send out a letter to all the residents and say, look, this is going to be a part of our program going forward. Anybody who's interested, contact the office, and we may be able to put one in for you fairly quickly. We did that on a Carrollton property, and I think the second, third month we managed the property, we built 12 pet yards and had 12 people paying an extra $100 a month as a byproduct of being able to do them all at once, not just on turns or renewals. So, when you're trying to implement those additional income strategies, sometimes coming up with a program where you can do it quicker and get more participation fast is just as important as doing it in the first place.
And you bring up a interesting point with the cost structures and understanding the expenses and what CapEx items should cost. Nobody's doing this, but I think it would be super ninja if you put like a giant spreadsheet together that had like high-low average of this particular line item, so that when under people are underwriting deals and they're bringing you in like to look at the financials, they're already kind of within the ranges that you expect to see. And then the offer, if it gets accepted, is a solid offer. It's not something you need to retrade later because, oh crap, this flooring. I under budget the flooring by X amount.
Right.
Um, Not to say that you need to do that, but that'd be
No,
so super cool if
that's a good
somebody
idea.
had
The
a
reality is we
centralized
have all the
database.
information. I just need to
Yeah.
format. I just need to format it in that way. But we already have that
Okay.
information. So yeah, that's a great idea, actually.
Okay. I volunteer as to be your Elon Musk if you need a
Okay.
if you need somebody to do the data. Um, but there was another thing that you had mentioned. Yeah, so they would engage with you before, ideally maybe a month or two before, maybe a month before call for offers,
Yeah,
or
that
at
that
least like
that
three
that's
weeks.
ideal. And the other thing that I like to do is I like to get out to the property, because you can sit at the computer and you can look at the competition on their websites. We can pull up a
Mhm.
CoStar. I can look at financial statements. I can look at the property's website itself. But boy, there is nothing like getting out there, kind of boots on the ground, and going out and looking at a few units. And so typically when somebody's interested and the timing will allow it, I like to coordinate a site inspection, a property tour with the broker. And if there's not a broker involved and it's an off-market deal, then we will go out and kind of mystery shop the property. We'll go out and pretend like we're a prospect. I can't do it too often myself anymore. When you're in your early 60s and you drive a Range Rover, people don't think you're really a lease prospect. But I can have one of my boys tag along and basically say we're looking for an apartment for them. But that gives you some real perspective too. You
Mhm.
get to see kind of what condition the property's in. You get to see what kind of condition the unit that they're showing is in, what kind of finishes are there. We've looked at a couple of deals. The Tides guys who lost a bunch of stuff over the last couple of years were notorious for doing really shoddy work on their upgrades. And it took me probably two or three property tours of their deals that were either on the market or being soft marketed by a broker to realize that from an expense standpoint, I couldn't take those 40% of the units that were upgraded and just assume that we weren't going to spend any more money in them because some of the work they did was so shoddy that if you were going to turn that unit, you'd have to go in and clean up some of what they did before. And you would never know that by just taking the broker's reference for as gospel. Oh, 40% of the units have been upgraded and they have stainless steel and quartz. um,
Upgraded. For-
yeah, yeah. So that's a key part. And I'll tell you what, my Kent Caffrey, who's our kind of our lead maintenance and construction supervisor, Kent came to work for me on a property in Carrollton in 1994. He's been in his position in the corporate office now for probably 20 plus years. And I literally have some clients that know Kent very personally, and their first call is not to me, it's to Kent. And they want him to drive the property and give him a thumbnail sketch for what he thinks the capital budget should be just from looking at the buildings, walking the property. A lot of times, Kent and I will go to a property and tour with the broker together so that he can be looking at those things and help to come up with an initial capital budget or review and provide commentary on our client's capital budget. So yeah, we get very involved in that process. And then, hopefully if one of our clients or a potential new client gets a property under contract, then we'll offer to jump in and do the due diligence. And we don't charge for that. That's a part of our business development effort. Our presumption is that if we've helped you to do your underwriting and we've done the due diligence for you, that hopefully at the end of the day, we get a signed management agreement and we're part of the team, trying to transition the property.
and I know this is that's a commitment of time and resources and manpower. What are some things a syndicator or somebody buying a property should have lined up? Like what's the buy box they should have that aligns with your business model? And then what are some things they can do other than just being a good communicator and providing you all the needed due diligence documents? What are some things to make it a good fit to work with you? Like who's your ideal customer?
Yeah, I mean, I
Sorry,
would
that
I
was
would
like 10
say
questions.
Yeah, no, I would say one of the important things is for us to understand, what the goal is. I've got clients that own properties today that they bought 30 years ago that we help them to buy that they still own. And I know when they're looking at a property that they're not looking at it from a short-term perspective. We've got clients that fall into the kind of medium term, time frame, which I would suggest is kind of 5 to 7 years. And then we've got clients that buy, and if they're able to have success relative to their business plan, I know that they will potentially try to sell in 2 to 4 years. And so understanding that dynamic is kind of important for us, because it does create a little bit different set of kind of thought process relative to how you spend money. For my clients that I think will own in 30 years, they're concerned about a quality asset in a quality location, and not necessarily being able to turn a decent profit and with a decent multiple of their equity in a short period of time. So a little bit different mindset to begin with. Then the other thing is, what's your motivation relative? What's your motivation and business plan relative to capital? So once again, I'll use my long-term clients as an example. If they think a property needs $2 million worth of capital improvements, they will not spend $2 million in year one. And a part of that is intentional. They want residents and prospects to see that there are improvements happening all the time. So they may spend, $900,000 in year one on the things that are the most important. If the property needs to be painted, if there are parking lot repairs, they may start the process of doing upgrades or adding amenities, whether it's pet yards or a package locker room or an updated fitness center. But part of their MO is to spend money over the course of several years. As opposed to, we've got clients who are just the opposite. If they've got $1 million in capital, they want to deploy that money as fast as possible so that they can get a fairly quick return on it. So, those are usually conversations that we have as we're dialing into financials, as we're talking to clients, potential clients, as we're going out and meeting with the broker, looking at the property. I've had a lot of times where we've probably turned thumbs down on properties and basically said, boy, at this price point, I wouldn't go there. And part of my mantra always has been that every property is a decent investment at the right price. At the end of the day, I don't think there's any areas of the DFW area. There's not really any areas in Houston. There's not really any areas in Austin or San Antonio that I would redline and say, don't go there. We did underwriting for a property down in Lancaster for a potential client a couple months ago, and it was around the corner from one that we had managed for a Jewish nonprofit for 10 years. So we knew the area really well. You've got to be aware of certain, if you told me you wanted to buy a property in Lancaster or DeSoto, I would suggest that you probably can't push the envelope too aggressively on annual rents because the demographic down there is a little different than if you were in Plano or Frisco or Carrollton. But I think as long as people kind of go into that with that knowledge that, hey, look, or you're buying in an outlying area, buying in Waco or Midlothian or Sherman, all markets that probably have a lot of positives going for them, all markets where I think you could make money, but I think you have to be a little more concerned about quality of the asset, the location, and especially the purchase price. So yeah, those are usually conversations that we have kind of along the way. A lot of clients will call me and say, "Hey, I'm looking at," and once they tell me what they're looking at, I'll try to shoot out and take a quick look at the property myself, and then give them some initial feedback. Um, I had a client call me 2 weeks ago on a Friday night at 7:30 and say, "Hey, we're looking at this property in Baytown, and we have some experience in Baytown. We manage a couple of properties down there in the Houston area." And they started kind of ticking down the details of the property. And when they told me the price, my response was, "Are you sure? Like that price almost sounds too good to be true." Say, "No, no, Brian, we're talking directly with the owner. We think we can tie up the property for X." I told him, I says, "Look, I know Baytown. We manage down there. If you can tie up that property at that quality, at that price, I would say absolutely full speed ahead." So, we've underwritten probably more properties than our clients have purchased. I'll bet we've probably underwritten, 4 or 5 properties for every one our clients have purchased. So, we've seen a lot of properties in a lot of areas and kind of have that perspective, not only of what we've managed, but also of what we've looked at. There are certain owners out there that when I find out the seller is XYZ company, I love it because I know that they don't operate very efficiently. I know we can operate more efficiently from an expense standpoint. We took over 2 properties in Houston back probably 15 years ago. My client owned them for 10 years. I invested with them. They were huge, huge scores. But we sat down with the staff. It was 2 properties that totaled about 500 units right next to each other, and they had 17 employees across 500 units. And when I met with the manager and I started asking, well, okay, well, what does Joe do? What does Paul do? Well, we hired Paul after Hurricane Ike to help with the cleanup, and we just keep finding projects for him to do. And so it was painfully obvious that they were so overloaded on payroll that their expense on payroll was probably 40% higher than what it should be. And so those are the ones you love to see that because now I know there's some real upside from an operational standpoint. But we typically like to be involved kind of early in the process. And if we can get a little bit of a window relative to reviewing underwriting or providing underwriting, then that's always beneficial too, because it gives us a chance to do that while continuing to do our day job and making sure we're providing support to our clients and their properties.
Cool. Um, well, we're at the top of the hour here. If anybody has any kind of last minute questions and wants to drop them in the chat or raise their hand, if not, while we're waiting for that, what is the best way for somebody to get in touch with you if they or a member of your team?
Yeah, yeah. So you can inquire through our website. There's a contact on our website that those emails come directly to myself and Kelly and Tammy. Or my email address is bkerns@tiptongroup.com. Either one of those ways is probably the best. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate all the insights. I hope people got value out of the call. Dennis Johnson is asking, is Dallas the only market? Um,
No, and I mentioned this to Brandon earlier that so currently we manage in the Metroplex from Mesquite all the way over to the southwest side of Fort Worth. We manage some properties in East Texas in Longview and Tyler. We manage in the greater Austin area, both on the north side in Round Rock and Georgetown, and all the way south, south of downtown. We manage in Houston from Katy on the west side to Baytown on the east. We have managed other properties in Texas. We managed a group of properties in Texarkana years ago, and our footprint is usually a byproduct of what our clients are buying. If somebody called me and said, can you manage 50 units for me in Lubbock, Texas, I would probably politely decline. If somebody called and said, can you manage 250 units for me in Sherman, then obviously that kind of fits into our wheelhouse. So we try to be painfully honest with people, and if we don't feel like it's a good fit, we will tell them right up front so that we don't waste their time. But yeah, there's not really any location in the Metroplex in any of those metropolitan areas. And we've managed a bunch of properties in San Antonio before. Don't have any today, but we've actually been underwriting a couple there recently for clients that are trying to buy. We managed properties in Oklahoma for a number of years for a Jewish nonprofit that owned in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. So if you think it's something that might kind of fit in the wheelhouse, I'd say just let us know and we can take a quick look at it and give you some feedback, yay or nay.
awesome. Quick question on ROI on package lockers. Do you know ROI off the top of your head?
Yeah, you know what? So we would normally package lockers are more expensive today than they were, 2 years ago. I'd say we probably pencil in 25 or $30,000 to put them in on a typical property. Let's call it a 200 unit property. So the monthly charge typically ranges between $10 and $15 depending on the property in the area. So yeah, I think your return on that is probably on the low side, 18 months, and on the high side, 24 to 32 months, but it's a pretty decent payback. And it's a service that most of the time residents love. They have no problem at all paying for it because, a lot of people will tell you horror stories about packages being stolen from their doorstep. And they like being able to go down and pick up their packages from a secure area, even if they're getting home at 10 or 11 o'clock at night.
What would you say is the high-low average of the property size that you guys manage?
Let's see. We are 16,000 units, and that is 86 properties. So on the high side, we manage a property in Arlington that's 616 units. We've got a couple in that kind of 400 unit range. And then I've got probably about a dozen properties that are between on the low end, 36 units to maybe 150, 160. The 36 units is a small property in Garland that one of my clients bought in 1995. And they own a 240 unit property that's about 10 minutes away. And we've always provided the management and leasing and maintenance from the bigger property, which has been very, very convenient. So, sometimes the small properties, if they fit kind of into an area where we already have a bunch of personnel, it becomes easier to kind of do them than if it was in a rural area, an hour and a half drive from the nearest asset that we have. So it just kind of depends on the location.
Awesome. Well, I believe that is all the time we have for today. I do appreciate your time today, Brian, and
Yeah, thanks for
thanks for all
having
the
me. This has been
insights.
fun.
Awesome. Well, everybody, I hope you have a great day.
All right, guys.
All
Thanks.
right. Bye now.
Bye.